Welcome to another episode of Turbo Build. My name is Brendan. It's fantastic to have you here, and today we're going to do a bit of depowering of the steering rack on my Turbo NB track car. G'day folks, my name is Brendan. It's fantastic to have you here. And so today we're going to depower the steering rack on the Turbo NB track car. Now I've actually sort of done the cheapo depowering method on this car many years ago, where you effectively remove the oil pump or the power steering pump, loop all the lines and get most of the fluid out. And that works, although there's a bit of slop and play left in the steering, and it's not quite perfect. And so what we're going to do today is a proper depower, and this is a known process. People have done it before, and we're going to apply it to this car. It involves removing the steering rack, so that's the first thing we're going to do. So come along, this one's going to be fun. So, as you probably saw last time, we've been fiddling with the electric water pump that will go here. That's now drying, and while the aluminium radiator is out of the way, I thought it'd be a good idea to get to work on the power steering. And so, to remove it's all fairly straightforward. You can see the power steering rack down here. Here's the looped lines. So there's two bolts here. There's two bolts just like where this one is. In behind the alternator here, we need to get to the where the steering wheel comes down into the actual rack. We'll need to disconnect that, and then we need to disconnect the two tie rods, which are these things either side of the car, which connect to effectively the wheels and do the actual steering. So we get to remove it all first, then we can start to disassemble things, and then we get to work on the depowering. Exciting. It's loose. They're actually reasonably easy to get to, although they're bloody tight. We need to disconnect the steering rack up here from the arm, and it's a 12mm bolt. Okay, now it's just the two tie rods at either wheel. So this is obviously the rack, and as you can see, all the lines and things that we're going to delete effectively. And so what used to happen was this main fat line used to go between the power steering pump. But on top of that, we've also got these sub lines, or these smaller ones. Effectively, there's about 6 different things we've got to fill here. So we've got 6 different holes that we don't need anymore. As part of that, we also need to remove some of the gizmos in here, and there's effectively a small amount of give in the pinion, I think it is, that lives in here, and we need to weld that up. So we'll do that. Now, with everything disassembled, the next interesting thing is this item here, which has like a spring underneath this cap. And what we need to do is remove this to sort of allow the rack to come apart. So I'm just cleaning that up so we can get a proper spanner on everything. We need to undo this locking ring, outside ring, then we can undo the bolt or the big nut or whatever you want to call it in the middle, and then everything can come apart. So we'll give it a clean first. Oh no, even the big spanner doesn't fit. Only just. Need the bigger spanner. Ow. That was easier. Underneath this cover is this spring, and then there's this yoke on the inside, which I think is sort of there to, I guess, get rid of some play and sort of keep a pressure on the actual steering system. We need to remove this so that we can pull the pinion out. It's kind of tricky to get this out. There we go. You can see the shape of it. It suits the or contours around the shaft, the steering shaft. Now I need to get to the pinion under here, so we need to remove all this. Removing, and then this boot comes up. We need to remove these torque bolts. We undo those two bolts, and this should with a bit of convincing pull out. Now we need to pop that back through, and the easiest way to do that now effectively this, with the all these weird ring things, are a clever kind of valve, I guess you'd say. And we delete all of that. We need to remove this circlip. This will slide off, and then underneath we need to weld something up. So we'll get the circlip off. Oh, that's better. There we go. Circlip off, and then this slides off. What we're left is this component and this component. They're actually not one piece, so we need to weld these together. Now that's the pinion that we've talked about. However, we haven't spoken about what's the guts inside here. So we need to remove each of our ends so that we can pull the shaft out from the inside here, because there's I guess what you call a valve type setup inside here, which we also need to remove, similar to this here. So we're going to pull the ends off, get the shaft out, get that off, and there's also a ring we need to cut off with the grinder. Ooh, the whole shaft's out. Now the next thing we need to do is cut this ring off. And of course, the most important thing is safety gear. There you go, there's a small nick in there, but nothing dangerous. So after welding up pinion, it's not a neat weld, but it'll do. I'm no pro. Well, there you go. Now we're at the point where it's basically all reassembly. So threading this back onto the steering rack is probably the hardest part of the whole thing, because it's quite hard to hold the whole rack to stop it from spinning while you try and rotate this. And before this goes back on, I think I'll give it a bit of a clean. There we go, that's a little better. And we can't forget the sealing ring goes in there. Okay, now the dust cap here can go back on, and the last thing we need to think about is, well, not the last thing, the next thing we need to think about is putting a little hoodad jingamy jingo back in here. So that drops in place. That's easy. The spring goes back in, this little washer goes back in. Now the tricky bit is setting the torque on this cap, because the amount of torque that's applied to this affects the steering feel. So what we're going to do is, we're going to get it started. So the tricky thing with this is it's supposed to be torqued to some weird thing like 4 foot-pounds or like 40 inch-pounds. Alright, so I've welded up these, well, the old sort of flare nut type fittings that used to be on the hoses, and they need to be installed now back into their homes here. And there is the finished rack ready to go back into the car. Certainly a bit of fun doing this. Took probably 3 or 4 hours maybe all up to get it out, fix it up and put it back in. Actually probably a bit less than that, maybe 3 hours. So anyway, we'll put it back in now, won't take long. As I mentioned, so all of these fittings have been welded up and then reinstalled. That's basically just to keep the dust and dirt out, and to keep the grease and things in. Yeah, let's go and stick it back in. Now, a couple of things you want to take note as part of the reinstallation process. First of all, you want the two ends of the rack to be reasonably even, so you don't have it all kilted one way or the other. Then we need to reinstall our steering uni joint. We put this on the pinion here first before we go and reinstall it back into the car. Make sure your steering wheel is centered. You'll notice when the steering wheel is centered that the detent, which this bolt goes through, is on the left hand side. So reinstall this back onto the rack with this bolt on the left hand side. This of course is for a right hand drive vehicle. For a left hand drive vehicle it's probably a bit different. Okay, I took the rack out and reinstalled it after cleaning out all the poo that was under the subframe there. So another thing to note, give your subframe a clean before you reinstall your rack. Well, that's it for depowering our steering rack. It's all in and done and I'm really happy with the result. It's not too hard to do. Look, there's a bit of work with welding and things, which if you're not a welder or you don't know how to weld or you don't have a welder, then that can be a bit of a limitation. But other than that, it's really just a matter of disassembly and reassembly. As I mentioned in the video, probably the hardest thing is getting one of those rod end rack ends off. That's probably the trickiest part. Anyway, my hands are dirty, so I've had a good day. It's been fantastic to have you here. As always, you can find us at beavismotorsport.com, Facebook and Instagram. If it's your first time here and you want to see more of this MX-5 type stuff, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.